Welcome, huge movie fanatic Nate, stopping on by, having already reviewed The Legend of Boggy Creek and Return to Boggy Creek. Is that what the second one's called, or the other one with Don Wells in it? I think it's called Return to Boggy Creek, possibly. I thought it only made sense to watch and review Boggy Creek 2 and The Legend Continues. I was just flabbergasted. I thought it was Boggy Creek 2, The Legend Continues. Like, how do you start like a sentence or a subtitle or whatever it's called with "and"? It's just like it bewilders me. And The Legend Continues. Like, why can't you just say The Legend Continues? But Boggy Creek 2 and The Legend Continues. So just like the Return to Boggy Creek, I'd never seen this before. Luckily, I think Vinegar Syndrome just recently did a new 4K scan of, some of the best surviving 35mm film elements, and luckily, I would imagine it's that same scan is available for free on Tubi. You can watch it on YouTube as well. So I watched this recently on Tubi, and it's interesting because, I figured I thought I'd like it more than the second one, or the Don Wells one, Return to Boggy Creek, and I probably do. It's hard to say if this is more competent or not. What's interesting about this whatever you want, if you want to call this a trilogy or a limited franchise, or I will just say what's interesting about this grouping of these three films is that, like, normally if you've got like say Jaws 3, the Jaws franchise, like, it starts with a really stellar movie, second one's pretty good, third one's not as good, and fourth one is just shit. Like, 4 movies, and they have a huge range of, like, a lot of times they start amazing. So you've got 3 Boggy Creek movies, and none of them are necessarily that amazing. I mean, I'd regard the first one as being the best, but more or less only for, like, I don't know, sentimental. I don't know if I just think that because I saw it when I was younger or whatever, but I'd still probably contend that the first one is probably the best in the, Return to Boggy Creek and Boggy Creek 2 and The Legend Continues is, they're equally kind of subpar or whatever. And if you see my review of Return to Boggy Creek, you know that one's basically almost like a kid's movie, and very much plays like a kid's movie. So I guess I probably like this one better because at least it's got a couple of hot chicks and some butt cheeks and CJ Jeep and, mudding scenes and what's his name who played, what's interesting is the director, Charles B. Pierce, who did the original Returns to do this one, and just like his little bit of a comedic role in his film The Town That Dreaded Sundown, he's actually like one of the lead, he might even be like more or less the lead actor in this movie, which is really, really interesting, and it makes you wonder why he decided to do that. But it is kind of fun to see, Charles B. Pierce as more or less the lead, or one of the lead roles, or playing one of the lead roles in this movie. This movie is basically just about, and it came out like in the early 80s, I think, 82 or 83 or something, and it's basically about, I think they just, like, Charles B. Pierce, I don't know if he's a professor or what the hell he is, but they got wind of someone seeing the Boggy Creek monster or whatever, so him and a couple babes and this one guy who is adverse to wearing a shirt head on out in the Jeep CJ. This movie's like a Jeep commercial, and I'm a big fan of these like early 80s Jeep CJ Jeeps, so this movie, that aspect of this movie I actually appreciated. They head on out, no doors, no top, and the kids got jeans and no shirt on, and unfortunately the 2 girls have shirts on. That would have been much fun. But this movie's rated PG, I think, so you're not going to see a whole hell of a lot. They tease a little bit, but they head on out with their camper trailer thing. It's one of those that's got like a hard bottom and a hard roof, and it goes like this, and those 2, it must be bedding areas, go out on the sides. I've never been in one of those. I've always been curious to go in one and see how that actually works, and it's kind of a good idea, like compact or whatever, like a tent on wheels, and at least you've got like a real roof and a real floor, and yeah, so I've never, those are, I don't know if they still make those or those are not made anymore or whatever, but they head on out to set up camp, and they also set up a tent. And what's really kind of interesting about this movie is they do a little bit of, like that one character from Friday the 13th final chapter there's deleted scenes of like the television version of him, Rob Dyer, setting up these radar dishes around his campsite to like they don't go into it very much, even in the deleted scenes, but he sets up radar dishes around the perimeter to make sure there's, Jason isn't going to sneak into his area where he's got the tent set up. Well, they do the same kind of thing. This is before final chapter, where it's much more in-depth in this movie. There's a couple of scenes just like devoted to it, like the scene from Alien where you see dots going closer to other dots, and it's like cinema suspense galore, like, oh my god, Pac-Man terror, bleep, 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 get out of there, that dot's coming closer to you. But they set up, and obviously this is the early 80s and the consumer computer's infancy, and even Charles B. Pierce has to throw in a consumer computer and all the magic and stuff that it does. I don't imagine that consumer computers did this back then, but for the purposes of the movie, it sure as hell does. This movie kind of resembles that movie I reviewed earlier this year. What the hell was it? The Creature of Black Lake, or I can't even remember. All these Bigfoot-ish movies are kind of was it Creature of Black Lake or something like that? I'll put the actual title or poster on the screen as I mention it right now. This movie reminded me a little bit of that, where they go off and set up camp to try to, what's funny is that movie kind of riffed on, Charles B. Pierce's The Legend of Boggy Creek, and then his Boggy Creek 2 and The Legend Continues riffs on that movie that riffed on his movie. So that's just kind of interesting. So very much like with that movie, these four individuals, two babes, a young guy who doesn't wear a shirt very often, and also Charles B. Pierce himself, as I don't know if he's a professor or what the hell he is, go off and set up camp to try to find, I can't remember what the hell they're trying to do, if they're just trying to take pictures or blow the Boggy Creek monster away. I don't even remember, having only seen it once. I don't even remember what their intentions are. That's something else I want to mention, is that there's a bunch of movies, a handful of movies that are kind of like mind wipe movies, I call them, where I can't remember for shit about them, and this is one of them to a certain extent. But before I did the review, I looked on YouTube and kind of scrubbed through, and just to scrub through it to see this, this different scenes and stuff to try to refresh my memory. And I think the reason I don't, quote unquote, don't remember much is because there's not much to remember per se. Once they get out there, there's like at least 3 or possibly 4 different scenes where Charles B. Pierce's character is like retelling stories of people's run-ins with the Boggy Creek monster, and I think all of them, some of them for sure, but possibly all of them are like humorous, where one guy gets scared in the outhouse and puts a leg down the outhouse, into the outhouse or something, and his wife has to spray off his leg that's covered in outhouse stuff. And so I think, I'm not sure, I would imagine maybe all of these tales of like people's run-ins with the monster from the past, which are all like fuzzy, like blurry, like in some scenes in Hitchcock's Vertigo, they have them like fog lenses or whatever. These these scenes that are tales from the past regarding people's run-ins with the monster are like in the Fogo-vision kind of interesting way of photographing. I don't know if they do that in post-production, or if they got something on the lens. I think they had something on the lens for Vertigo. Whether they do it in post or during production for this movie, I don't know. But I almost feel like those scenes, like I say, there's probably at least 3, possibly 4. I think they're there to like just pad the movie, like they didn't have enough to film with just the the 2 babes, the young guy without a shirt, and Charles B. Pierce enough to make it like 90 minutes, so they just put in these extra, Charles B. Pierce, I mean, the character that he plays in Town That Dreaded Sundown is, like when he got into that movie, there wasn't much like goofy stuff in his original The Legend of Boggy Creek, but like by the time you get to Town That Dreaded Sundown, he puts in some like attempts at comedy and stuff, and like with the music and stuff. So you got to appreciate Charles B. Pierce's intent or hope to throw in some levity or whatever the hell you want to call it in this movie, to take the viewer away from the nail-biting suspense that can be found in every other scene. Just kidding. There's a funny scene early on where after they set up camp and they go out looking around, and they find this one abandoned house, and all of a sudden there's like a wild dog's running down on them, and there's this action shot of Charles B. Pierce going through the frame like shooting a handgun, boom boom boom. It's like, oh boy. And there's this scene where the wild dog, I can't remember if they end up, God, I think they end up like killing the dog in the movie, because it's like sitting there like foaming or bleeding out the mouth and vibrating or whatever on the ground. And I don't know if they killed it for real or if it was just having a spasm or they gave it some drugs to have it have a spasm or what. But there's a funny scene where, you know, wild dog attack, and that's one of the scenes where you see one of the babes, you know, buttocks jiggling and with all her, you know, whatever, jello jiggling, fun and glory and stuff. That was actually one of the first scenes. I don't know if I watched it on YouTube or I don't know why I would have seen that scene first. Maybe I was, you know, months ago I scanned through and just seen the ass and watched that scene or whatever. But yeah, it's definitely definitely a random goofy movie. Maybe about halfway through the movie or so, I don't know why, the girls are left, you know, back at the campsite, maybe out alone, while Charles B. Pierce and the shirtless kid, I mean, don't get me wrong, the guy wears a shirt every now and then, maybe half of the time or something, but I think they go off to do something, and I don't know why the girls are feeling so restless that they have to jump in the Jeep that that now has like the rag top and rag doors, and I don't know what they're trying to do, if they're trying to go look for the monster or what, but they end up getting stuck in the mud, and I think they have to they don't know how to put it in a four-wheel drive, and then one of them reads the manual and discovers how to put it in four-wheel drive, only to like dig themselves further into the you know, the mud or whatever. And as a kid, you know, I would have much, you know, I actually bought a couple VHS tapes that were like, you know, just mud and, you know, monster trucks going through mud and all this kind of stuff. So as a kid, I probably would have liked that scene, you know, of them in the mud more than I do now. But it's still fun to watch the old classic Jeep, you know, get in the mud and whatever, and just witness this scene that is just like there for who knows why. It's like this Jeep ad and, you know, a Babe ad and who the hell knows what. So sometime in the last third of this movie, they end up taking a boat downriver and end up finding this hillbilly guy who as we learn, oh, that's something else that I forgot to mention, that this movie actually, for the very first time, now being the third film in like an unofficial trilogy or whatever, the Charles B. Pierce did the first one, someone else did the second one, and he returns to do the third one, which he calls the second one. It's just so confusing, but and the legend continues. But in this movie, which is kind of an interesting variation from his original film, and even the second one that he didn't do, which is there's like an adolescent or you know, a young monster in this movie, which is you know, an interesting twist to add to it. Third movie time, or third time's a charm, or third movie or whatever, or second Pierce one, and let's add a little, like a, you know, a teenager or a little kid monster. So I don't know if the main monster is mom or dad. I can't remember if that's indicated or not, but anyway, they go to visit this hillbilly guy, and it turns out that this hillbilly guy has actually caught the juvenile or the young monster, the teenage monster, whatever the hell you want to call it. And you know, he's lighting up, for some reason he's lighting all these fires around the house, I guess to keep the adult, which we don't necessarily know if it's mom or dad, monster away. I don't know what I can't remember if he mentions what he plans to do with the monster or not, but you know, there's a scene obviously where Charles B. Pierce, with the help of the babes, the bodacious babes, end up reuniting the child monster with the adult monster, and I can't remember what happens to the hillbilly or whatever, but I do actually kind of like the attempt at sentimentality that Charles B. Pierce does at the end of the movie, saying, you know, like, well, we asked those people at the store if there's any monsters around, and they said no, and that's because there aren't any monsters around. These are just two creatures that are just trying to live their life out in the wild. And I thought that, like, sentiment, even though it's like kind of infantile first grade kindergarten sentiment, I thought, who the hell else had that kind of, oh, Ed Wood. His sentiment was like both competent and like childlike at the same time. Like if you've seen Plan 9 from Outer Space or whatever, like, he had some good points, but it was presented in like this kindergarten preschool way. And I think, you know, the sentiment at the end of this movie that I just you know, just spoke of or repeated, I think isn't quite preschool, maybe first or second grade sentimentality. But what a great way to end this movie. Like, we went into you know, Charles B. Pierce character went into it like thinking, you know, that this is a monster, but now he kind of respects the monster's privacy or privacy, and just gonna, you know, reunite the monster with the teenage monster. I don't know what teenager isn't a monster, but and boat away into the sunset with a couple of bodacious babes with butts, and the kid who doesn't like to wear a shirt. But my star, I can't remember what I gave I can't remember the star rating I gave either of the other two Boggy Creek movies, but my star rating for this one, I can go as high as like 1.5 stars out of 4 stars probably, because don't get me wrong, it's mostly like nonsense more or less, like just filler to make a 90-minute movie. But you know, the bodacious babes don't hurt. The Jeep, classic CJ Jeep doesn't hurt, and just the classic 80s stuff, like the camper trailer and the their little computer with the moving dots scenes are kind of fun. And just to see Charles B. Pierce as one of the main characters, and I think he does some narration as well, and it's kind of fun to see him not in front of the camera instead of just simply being behind it. So I think pretty sure he wrote and directed this as well, and also starred in front of it. So you got to hand it to him for at least going for it and doing Boggy Creek 2 and The Legend Continues. I just think that's so weird, and The Legend Continues. But you can see this for free on Tubi. If it's gone off there, you can probably find it on YouTube. Feel free to stop on by in the comments. Let me know what you think of this movie. What did I say? 1.5 stars out of 4, very, very much possibly. Yeah, kind of goofy. It's kind of a bummer. Well, I don't know if missing out on that Blu-ray. They just recently, I think in May, Vinegar Syndrome did a limited run on the Blu-ray of this film, and not so sure I need it anyway, and because I don't think it's something I need to revisit very often. But yeah, that'll do it for my review. Thanks a lot for watching. Hope you guys enjoyed, and as always, we'll catch you on the next video.